Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the FAÇADE webinar series. My name is Laetitia Marot. I am a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellow at the AMEU Center of Excellence, and I propose this webinar series in the frame of my FAÇADE project that aims at developing a bio-based coating for wooden facades. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Dr. Tanja Bagar, who is going to talk about the use of hemp as a source of nutrients and essential phytochemicals for food and medicinal applications. Dr. Bagar is CEO and chairman of the Expert Council of the International Institute for Cannabinoids. She holds a bachelor degree in microbiology and a PhD in biomedicine, and she is also expert in biochemistry and medical use of cannabinoids. Today, the presentation is recorded, and as usual, you can send your questions in the chat on the right of your screen. I will read them to Dr. Bagar at the end of the presentation, and if we do not manage to cover all of them, we'll come back to you by email in a couple of days. So now let's talk about hemp. Dr. Bagar, you can start when you want.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for this wonderful introduction. Yes, so the topic of my today's talk is hemp, not so much from a constructional point of view, but rather from the point of view of it being a really good source of nutrients and also essential phytocannabinoids, as we see in medicine being applied more and more. So hemp usually is viewed either something like a devil's plant on one side that leads into the world of heavier drugs and criminal. This has been kind of the idea behind the strong prohibition that cannabis and also hemp has been facing in the last decades. And then on the other hand, today we have quite a number of people that have started viewing this hemp and cannabis something like a plant that heals everything. Online you can find case reports or also kind of anecdotes about hemp, cannabis, cannabinoids healing everything from being bald to cancer to multiple sclerosis, everything. And actually we are with hemp and cannabis, we're in luck because there are so many studies that today we don't have to rely on these ideology or these anecdotes, but rather we can focus on science. And we have very good ground where we can discern what are the facts and what are the myths about this plant. This is one of the best studied plants and one of the best studies phyto-derived molecules. In PubMed and in other databases, we can find over 100,000 publications on this topic. So this is really indeed a very well-researched plant. So when we start to talk about hemp, it's good that we have in mind that the plants have evolved way earlier on our planets than human beings, and hemp as well. And it has been calculated that the plant cannabis itself has about 37 million years of evolutionary advantage on this planet before humans evolved on this planet. So sometimes from this perspective, it's rather a bit on the erroneous side when we look at the development of the European legislation, which is now stating that cannabinoids and hemp are novel foods. And actually, if anything, from the point of view of our planet, we are the novel ones, not hemp or cannabis. Human beings have found hemp to be useful very on in the development. We have proved that when human beings were still kind of in the nomadic phase and moving a lot around, that they found hemp seeds to be very nutritious, and they took them with them so that wherever they moved to, they started growing hemp as a source of very good nutrients, which in fact we will cover later what kind of nutritional value they have. And most of the civilizations we have records of, either in paper or on walls, they have we can see from their records that they had a knowledge of what to do with hemp, what to do with cannabis. They used it for fiber, they used it for food, they also used it as medicine, they used it in religious purposes. So cannabis has been very well known for it to have pain relieving properties, for it to have well-being enhancing properties. We know that it has been used in very beautiful religious, let's say, rituals, where the aim was that a community of people gets closer and connects, and preferably also connects to something higher than themselves. And cannabis has many times been used in these rituals. They have recently also found some tombs in the east, in some parts of China, where very important people were buried together with not only cannabis seeds, but also the cannabis flowers. These cannabis flowers were so well intact that they could determine the content of THC and CBD, and they found that this cannabis had a very high content of THC, indicating that it was used for religious purposes of kind of, helping guide the spirit of the one that has passed on to the other realms. So in most of the civilization, cannabis has been very well used, and they knew exactly what it's good for and what not. And now let's have a little bit of a look what this plant really is. So in these days, we have a lot of names for this plant. In all of the languages, we have all kinds of different names that can sometimes be very confusing. But from a biological point of view, it has now been found through the methods of molecular biology that we only have one single, let's say, one single biological plant that in the Latin it's called Cannabis sativa L. Before, it was considered that we have three varieties of cannabis, which is sativa, indica, and ruderalis, where sativa is the one that usually is grown for fibers and for seeds. Indica is the one that contains a lot of THC, and ruderalis is the kind of indigenous variety of cannabis that grows in very different regions around the world. But because cannabis is the kind of a plant that has male and female plants, and they crossbreed very effectively, it was now shown that there has been so much crossbreeding already in nature, and also people were humans, because of their interest in this plant, they crossbred very intensively, and that there's no way that we can separate it into these three varieties. And now we actually, from a very pure botanical and biological point of view, we say that there's only one single species of this plant called Cannabis sativa L, and that all these, what usually we call them strains, are actually, we can't separate the strains either, that we can only separate them based on their chemical composition, and that we call them chemovars, based on the ratios between the cannabinoids that they contain. Even the definitions of what a medical cannabis is, what an industrial hemp is, sometimes countries don't even have a definition of what it means to have medical cannabis, or they have very different definitions. Let's say in Slovenia, it means that it's a very well analyzed, defined, and high quality preparation. In other countries, medical cannabis means specifically having high THC content. So all of these, let's say, words, or this, how we describe it, are very confusing. And this is why I think it's very important that we stick to very proper naming of this plant to begin with. Okay, so most of the interesting health promoting benefits are found in the female plant. So the male plant is the one that produces pollen, and the female plant catches the pollen, and after the pollination, the seeds can develop on the female plant. But from a nutritional and also medical point of view, the female plant is the one that carries most of its properties. And usually this plant was first interesting for scientists because it was because it contained THC, and THC was the one that actually got all the research interest in the first 20 years of the research, because it was considered that THC is actually the only active ingredient in the cannabis plant. Now, in the last decades, maybe, yeah, a short decade, CBD has also gained a lot of attention, not only in science, but also in as a food supplement and on the markets. But it's good to keep in mind that this is a rather, from a chemical point of view, complex plant. It contains over 1,000 different bioactive substances, and that if we're only talking about THC and CBD, we're only talking about a tip of the iceberg, because all of the 1,000 other molecules that this plant contains, I'm sure research and also clinical practice will show, and is already showing, that these plants also have a huge potential, and that when we're talking about the medical use of cannabis, we have to keep in mind the whole bouquet of these bioactive substances that this plant contains. So the female plant looks something like this. This is a very kind of a short female plant with a typical leaves, and then here developing the floss or the flower of the cannabis plant. And this is where on the flower, the female plants develop either seeds, or they develop something we call trichomes, which I will go into detail later, that contain most of these phytocannabinoids. From the nutritional point of view, the seeds are the ones that are very interesting. Hemp seeds, they look something like this under, let's say, a weak microscope. And the hemp or cannabis seeds, they have been shown to be nutritionally very, very dense, and also very important in terms of addressing some of the basic nutritional needs that we have. So about a third of the seed is is composed of fatty acids. About a third is composed of proteins, meaning amino acids, and then a third is composed of carbohydrates, ashes, and also vitamins and minerals, and fiber. And the important, the very, how should we say, advantage point in hemp seeds is that they contain a very specific ratio of essential fatty acids. So the omega-3, 6, and 9s, they are in the kind of ratio, we can see this in this column, they are in the kind of ratio that also very closely resembles the the fatty acids composition of our cells. So what's the, around every cell, we have a fatty biolayer. And this is composed of very similar fatty acids as they're also found in the hemp seeds. And it is considered now in the nutritional arena that the ratio of omega-3, 6, and 9 in the hemp seeds is kind of ideal for our human consumption. So it feeds our cells and our bodies most optimally of all the plant-derived fats. In comparison maybe to all other flax seeds, canola seeds, soybeans, and sunflower, we see that it has a lot of omega-6 and also omega-3 fatty acids that are very important for for these basic, because essential fatty acids basically mean that they are essential in terms that our body is not able to make them, make these fatty acids itself. So we have to bring it in with food, and we can see that this ratio is very, very excellent in hemp seeds. Then another point is that it contains a lot. So I said about a third of the seed are proteins, meaning amino acids. And it's very interesting to have a look at the which kind of amino acids do hemp seeds have, because we have also, as in fatty acids, we have essential amino acids that our bodies are not able to make themselves, and we need to bring them in with food. And in terms of amino acid, it was long believed that we are not able to get all of the essential amino acids with plant-based food. And here in the case of hemp, this is one of the rare plant sources that has all of the essential amino acids that our bodies need. So for people who choose not to eat animal proteins, it's very important to keep in mind to get the entire amino acid spectrum. And here hemp seeds can be a very important source of these amino acids. Then if we look at one important aspect of the nutrition and health promoting benefits that the hemp seeds also bring are the fibers. So I'm sure you have all noticed that it's very, how should we say, that this health industry or nutritional industry is very, they come up with a new diet every week. They come up with new guidelines, what is now the optimal food for human beings and so forth. And when we look, when we look a bit closer on what they're recommending, they're not, they are very different in terms of what they're recommending. But there are three things usually all of the health and nutritional experts are unanimous about, and that is that we need to increase the ingestion of essential fatty acids. Omega-3s are very well promoted in all of them because they have very specific health promoting benefits. And then getting a good source of proteins, which hemp seeds also have. And then the third is that the importance of dietary fiber in our food. And here as well, hemp seeds are a very, very good source of soluble and insoluble fibers. So very, let's say, with 2 spoons of hemp seeds, we can already have all of the dietary needs for fiber in our digestion, which aids very good in our gut health. But then on top of all of this, we can see here a spectrum of very good combination of different vitamins and also different minerals that hemp seeds bring with themselves. So we can see that really they're, as seeds, they're very, very, they are very nutritionally dense, and they can kind of support these 3 cornerstones of good nutrition: essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, and fiber. So this is why we consider hemp seeds to be something like a almost superfood, because they come with such an arsenal of these essential nutrients. Okay, now I would like to go over to, so we've covered a little bit about the nutrition, and now let's look at what are the phytochemicals that the hemp plant brings that makes it very good or very interesting in medicine. So the female plant, next to having seeds, also produces these glands that we call trichoma. This word comes from Greek, and it means hair because you can see it has kind of a hair-like structure. And this is where the hemp and cannabis plant produce most of the cannabinoids. So cannabinoids are the molecules. So THC is one of the cannabinoids, CBD is one of the cannabinoids. These are the molecules that bind to cannabinoid receptors in our bodies and produce effects. And when we look at the plant where most of these cannabinoids are produced, it is exactly in these glandular trichomas that the female plant has. And now in nature, or for the plant, the role of these trichoma, because they are kind of sticky, they catch the pollen that comes from the male plant. And when cannabis is grown for medical purposes, where we want to have the highest possible concentrations of these chemicals, these female plants are always grown in a way that they make sure that there's no male plants anywhere around. This is why they are usually grown indoor, because the female plant, if it does not catch any male pollen, it starts to grow more and more of these sticky resins, producing more and more cannabinoids. So this is why they're grown in such a way. Okay, so this is the part where the plant produces majority of phytocannabinoids. And if we look, so this is what it would look under a microscope. So these would be kind of sticky little hairs on this plant that contain a lot of chemicals. And such a trichoma would typically contain about 144 cannabinoids, more than 160 terpenes, also flavonoids, and majority of these 1,000+ bioactive molecules are actually contained in these trichomes. So now if we go over shortly a little bit of what these cannabinoids do when we enter them, when we bring them into our body, either we smoke them or we ingest them or we use some kind of medical preparations, what actually happens when these molecules enter into our body. So if we imagine our bodies from a biochemical perspective quite complex, we have many bodily systems, many organs, and if we look under a microscope, the cells in our body from different systems, let's say a kidney cell, or let's take a neuronal cells, under a microscope, they look very different. But when we look at their basic biochemistry, so if we, for example, compare an immune cell with a muscle cell, they look completely different under a microscope, and they also perform very different functions. But if we look at the basic biochemical setup of a cell, these cells are very much alike. So this would be one typical human cell. It has this lipid bilayer around the nucleus where we have all the genes and other organelles. And our human body is composed of over 30 billion cells. And for 30 billion cells to function as one human body, one unit, these cells have to communicate very well with each other. And we are in luck because our cells are very talkative. They produce a lot of signaling molecules that they use to communicate with each other. We know, for example, that the best communicators are our gut and our brain. They exchange messages constantly about what's happening in our body, but also all other cells. And the way they communicate is via signaling molecules. So, for example, hormones, neurotransmitters are all signaling molecules. And the reason why I'm explaining this is because the basic biochemical function of these cannabinoids is also that they're signaling molecules. They help to convey messages between different cells in our body so that they can coordinate and function as one unit, not as one single cell. And if we imagine that this ball is a cell, so for cells to communicate with each other, they have to have a way to catch these messages that the other cells are sending. And the way they do this is via receptors. So each cell has something like human beings, we have eyes and ears and other sensory perceptive motives, but the cells, of course, don't have that, but they have receptors. And the diversity of these receptors in our body is very, very wide. So we have receptors for, let's say, natrium. We have receptors that change based on pH value. We have receptors that bind, I don't know, serotonin, dopamine, every very, very diverse spectrum of these receptors. And usually it's like that, so if we imagine that this is a cell, a part of the receptor is always on the outside and it's sensing what's happening on the outside. And when something binds to the receptor, then this part of the receptor that's inside of the cell changes and signals to the nucleus where we have our genes what has happened on the outside. So maybe if we imagine it, maybe best in the case of our pancreas, for example, our pancreas has a lot of receptors for glucose, so the blood sugar. And in case there's too much blood sugar, this blood sugar binds to the receptor, a change happens on the inside, and this signals to the cell that it needs to start to produce insulin as a response to elevated blood sugar. And this kind of communication happens in all of our cells. And one of the type of receptors that our body also has are cannabinoid receptors. So our body has specific receptors that bind molecules that are THC-like, that bind molecules that are CBD-like. So this spectrum of receptors is very wide, and one of the types are specific ones for cannabinoids. And when the scientists were studying how THC actually produces the effects that it does, they found these cannabinoid receptors. And later it was very, how should we say, unusual, because they found that these cannabinoid receptors are very, very common in our cell. There's practically not a cell type in our body that does not have cannabinoid receptors. And then there are some regions in our brain that have a very, very high density of cannabinoid receptors. And later it was found that, of course, these cannabinoid receptors that we have in our bodies are not there to sense cannabinoids that we potentially bring into our body via a plant, but that we produce cannabinoids also in our own body. We call them endocannabinoids, and our body produces molecules that are very closely related to THC and very closely related to CBD, and they have very important functions in our body. And this, our own system for this, we call the endocannabinoid system. So the receptors and our own endocannabinoids. And what these, so we call them the endocannabinoid system. And what the scientists were very puzzled to find, it was let's say, a big scientific challenge to find what the role of these molecules actually is. And after much research, we now consider these cannabinoids to be like guardian molecules in our body. So like an SOS type of a mechanism. So whenever something biochemically goes off balance in our body, cannabinoids are produced, and they make sure and activate all other systems in our body to get us back into biochemical balance. And this, it doesn't matter if this balance means that, I don't know, we broke our leg in an accident, or we had an emotional stress, or we haven't slept enough, or we breathed in air with a lot of pollution. It doesn't matter what this what is causing this disbalance. This is like I imagine it like the first line of defense. You know, when there's something in our cells at the basic cellular level that goes off balance, our body produces endocannabinoids and tries to get our biochemistry back into balance as soon as possible. And this is the way these molecules function. And this is one of the reasons why they have such a huge and diverse potential in medicine, because their basic mode of function is to reestablish this basic biochemical balance. And the way that we live in this modern society, most of the people are faced with disbalances, bigger or smaller, in their biochemistry. And when this basic cellular biochemistry is starting to come back into balance, many of the symptoms start to disappear or become less intense. And this is the reason why we see that the cannabinoids can be very effectively used in, let's say, PTSD, or for sleep disturbances, or in cancer, or in autoimmune conditions, or in neurological conditions like epilepsy, because we're starting to reestablish this basic balance in our body. And this is why we call them that they're essential phytonutrients or phytochemicals, because they really essentially build back our resilience, our own inner, let's say, biochemical pillars of health. And this is why I am strongly hoping that medicine will start to recognize these molecules more and more and start to use them, implement them in medicine, because it really starts to build this homeostasis back, and ensuring that we can have like long-term good health, not just fighting individual symptoms. Okay, so this would be from my side, and I'm open to questions now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Tanja, for this very nice presentation. It was very interesting. We have questions in the chat. So we have a question from Philip. What are the type of products, label approvals that someone should look for when trying to buy CBD containing products? And are the CBD shops, which have been appearing all over Europe recently, a good place to find quality products, or are most of them marketing tricks which sell placebo THC to attract more people?
So yes, they are, like in every market, they're very excellent CBD products, and they're also the ones that are selling placebo and are very, that don't contain much CBD to begin with. So the best way to, I do not buy a CBD containing product unless the producer can show me the certificate of origin of hemp, because hemp is also ecoremediational plant that kind of accumulates a lot of the toxins from the environment where it grows. We know it's a hyper accumulator of heavy metals and pesticides. And when we extract cannabinoids from the plant, we take all of these toxins along with them. So where hemp was grown for the production of CBD products is very essential. So I always ask for that, preferably an ecological certificate and then certificate of analysis, so that we can see exactly that this batch has been tested for the content of CBD and that it has been tested for possible traces of pollutants and also possible traces of solvents, because they are usually used to extract the phytocannabinoids. So where we buy them, it's not so very relevant. Just when you are considering buying, just ask them these few questions: show me certificates, show me the origin, and most of them, like 80%, do not have anything to show, and then you choose the ones that can show you some analysis behind what they're selling.
Okay, thank you. We have VS has 3 questions, so I will pick one because we don't have so much time. What country of EU is farthest in legislation about using hemp products?
Well, here in European Union, I don't think, well, Switzerland, although it's not an EU country, has, from my perspective, the best laws. Otherwise, there's a kind of legislationally seen, it's kind of a disaster in Europe. We have like a patchwork of kind of different, legislations that are completely off. Each country kind of interprets it in its own way what this same legislation means. So in Europe, we don't have a good example. We have, for example, Switzerland, and then Israel has very good legislation considering using cannabis for medical purposes. But in European Union, there's no one that I would find to have a good laws concerning this.
Okay. We have a question from Oyana Gordobil. She's asking if you have an idea about the legal status regarding the use and regulation of compounds derived from hemp, seeds in cosmetics and in skincare field?
So if we're talking only about hemp seeds, which actually contain no cannabinoids, they are completely free to be used as compounds in cosmetics, even in food. So the most of the legislational problems we have with cannabinoids, so with these phytomolecules that are mostly in the green part of the flower. In the hemp seeds, we only have the nutritional value and they're not regulated in any way. So hemp seeds, their oils or anything from the hemp seeds can freely be used as food or cosmetic ingredients with no restrictions whatsoever.
Okay. Another question from Arnaud D. Do you have information about the parameters which influence cannabinoids production in trichome?
Do you have? Yes, of course. So in the plant, the most important factor is sunlight. So the more intense the sunlight, the longer the duration of sunlight, the more cannabinoids usually are produced in the trichomes. And of course, this aspect that the male pollen cannot be anywhere close, because then the plant will start to produce seeds and not any more trichomes or phytocannabinoids. So, but essentially when we're growing, this is why usually they're also grown in with artificial light, because then they can regulate how much of the light they give, and the more of the light they give, the more trichomes are produced and the more phytocannabinoids the plant has.
Okay, thank you. Question from Jiva Fisher. Are there any other plants that contain cannabinoids?
Yes, they are. Cannabis is actually the only plant that contains cannabinoids that is considered to be the dangerous one, but there also, for example, Echinacea also contains phytocannabinoids. There are papers that describe more than 10 different varieties of plants that contain compounds that bind cannabinoid receptors. They have even found a compound in carrots that binds to the CB2 receptors, but we're still only fighting cannabis as but it is true that cannabis is the one that contains the highest diversity and also the highest concentration of these cannabinoids, but it is far not the only plant that contains that.
Okay. Another question from Arnaud D. Do you know which are the best stages to harvest hemp flowers for cannabinoids?
Yes, there's very exact ways that we can determine when. So usually people get like these kind of tiny microscopes that you put into your phone and have a look when the trichomes are starting to form these hats on top. That is usually the time when it's best to harvest it for the highest concentration of cannabinoids. But there are very good guidelines already available online that what do you have to look at. So and it's also maybe depends on which kind of cannabinoid. So now in this market and also in medicine, for example, CBG is becoming a very important food supplement / medicine. And this is also can be harvested from very young plants, because this is the first cannabinoid formed in the plant. So it also depends on what you're trying to get out of the plant.
Okay. I will take one last question because we are running out of time. Okay. So would you recommend smoking cannabis as means of deriving the much needed nutrients?
No, smoking of cannabis or smoking of anything else from a health point of view is definitely completely not recommendable. Even if we smoke cannabis, the cannabinoids that are burned are actually chemically harmed. We know that there are also many other harmful substances that are produced by burning this that we never want to have in our body. So even as a preventive measure or recreational use, I would never recommend smoking. And if we're talking about health or trying to find a way to promote your own health and or reestablish health, smoking is like the worst thing one can do of anything, including cannabis. Now, there are, of course, cases where we need to get inhale cannabis to get its maximal health benefits. For example, when we have a situation that we're addressing in the lungs, and in those cases, we recommend using vaporizers. So these small devices where you can set exactly the temperature of the heating chamber, and you can get exactly all of the cannabinoids you want, but you don't have any of the burning and any of the harmful substances being produced during burning. So no, smoking, no. No.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation and your recommendation and for answering all the questions. Thank you to all the participants who joined us today. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and I hope you will come back to see one of the future webinars. So I wish you to all a very good day.
Thank you very much, Letizia, for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure for me too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.